I never thought one quiet evening at my neighbor's house would change everything. But when his cousin's hand slid into mine, and she whispered, "You're too dangerous to ignore," I knew I was standing on the edge of something I couldn't walk away from. I wasn't expecting anything unusual that evening. My neighbor had invited me over for a simple dinner. Nothing fancy, just a few friends and family gathered in his backyard where the air smelled faintly of grilled food and fresh-cut grass. I had gone with the easy mindset of small talk, maybe a couple of laughs, and then heading home. But the moment I stepped into that circle of voices and soft music, I noticed her. She was standing near the patio lights, a glass in her hand, talking with two of the older guests. At first, I didn't even know she was my neighbor's cousin. I just knew she carried herself differently. There was something about her posture, the way her shoulders rested back, the calm rhythm of her gestures. She wasn't trying to be the center of attention, but somehow the space around her felt quieter, as if the noise softened when she spoke. She turned slightly, and for the first time, I caught her face in the glow of the lanterns. Lines of maturity graced her features, not in a way that dimmed her beauty, but in a way that made her presence feel grounded, assured. There was elegance in how she smiled, even in something as simple as the way she tucked a strand of hair behind her ear. When my neighbor finally brought me over to introduce us, my chest tightened, not from nerves exactly, but from the sudden awareness that I wanted to make a good impression. "This is my cousin," he said casually, his hand gesturing between us. "She's visiting for a while." She extended her hand. I expected a polite shake, quick and distant. Instead, her palm was warm, her grip confident yet soft. For a single heartbeat longer than necessary, she held on, her eyes steady on mine. There was no rush in the way she released me, as if she was giving me time to feel the moment, to wonder if I imagined the subtle spark that passed between us. The evening carried on, chatter about food, about work, about how warm the season had been. Yet I kept catching myself listening for her voice, the low, even tone of it cutting through the blur of conversations. Every now and then, she laughed, and it wasn't loud or forced. It was the kind of laughter that slipped in naturally, almost private, like she had found something genuinely amusing. At one point, she leaned slightly across the table to pass a plate closer to me. Her fingers brushed the side of mine. An accident, surely, but it left a strange awareness tingling in my hand. I looked up, and she was already watching me, her lips curling into the smallest of knowing smiles before she looked away. And just like that, something unspoken was already there, a quiet thread pulling me toward her, though I had barely learned her name. The evening slowly thinned out as plates emptied and conversations scattered into smaller circles. Some of the older guests drifted toward the living room, while my neighbor busied himself refilling drinks. I found myself outside again, leaning against the wooden railing of the porch, grateful for the cooler air brushing against my skin. That's when she stepped out. She carried a mug of tea in both hands, steam curling in the space between us. For a moment, she didn't speak. She just let the night settle around her, her gaze lifting to the branches swaying above the garden. The yellow glow from the patio light caught in her hair, and I couldn't help noticing how natural she looked there, as though the quiet had been made for her. "You don't say much," she said finally, her voice smooth but laced with curiosity. She glanced at me over the rim of her mug, her eyes sharp in a way that felt almost disarming. I gave a small smile, a little embarrassed. I usually wait until I have something worth saying. She let out a soft laugh, the kind that wasn't loud but stayed with you. Then she tilted her head, studying me. "So what's worth saying tonight?" It was such a simple question, yet I felt like she had just peeled something open inside me. I found myself talking about small things first, my work, the pressure of trying to prove myself, the way I sometimes felt caught between wanting to chase something bigger and not knowing what that bigger was yet. She listened, really listened, her eyes fixed on me as though each word mattered. And then she surprised me. "What keeps you awake at night?" she asked softly, almost like it was a secret she wasn't supposed to ask. The question hung between us, heavier than the casual chatter from the house. I hesitated, then answered honestly, about fears of failing, about wanting to be seen for more than just my age, about the quiet ache of not knowing where I truly belonged. She didn't interrupt. Instead, she took a slow sip of her tea, her gaze never leaving mine. The silence wasn't uncomfortable. It was grounding, as though she was making space for me to say things I rarely admitted. "You're braver than you think," she said finally. Her hand reached out, just for a moment, brushing my forearm as she set her cup down on the railing. Her touch was feather-light, but it sent a ripple through me, sparking an awareness that settled deep and refused to fade. I tried to answer, but my voice caught. She only smiled, the corners of her lips curving in a way that felt both knowing and kind. The sounds of laughter drifted from inside, but out here, it felt like the world had shrunk down to just the two of us. A conversation suspended in the quiet night, and a closeness that didn't need to be named. The night stretched on, but instead of fading, the air between us seemed to grow heavier, not uncomfortable, but charged with something neither of us dared to put into words. Inside, the others were still laughing, their voices echoing faintly through the open windows, but out here, it felt like another world entirely. I found myself watching her more closely than I should have. The way her fingers traced the rim of her mug absent-mindedly, the subtle arch of her brow whenever she was curious, the stillness in her posture that carried both strength and ease. She wasn't trying to impress anyone. She didn't need to. And yet, I caught myself thinking how impossible it was not to notice her. That realization came with a tangle of hesitation. She was older, more experienced, a woman who had lived through chapters one hadn't even begun to write. She wasn't just anyone either. She was my neighbor's cousin, someone tied to the everyday normalcy of my world. This wasn't supposed to happen. But the more I tried to reason with myself, the harder it was to ignore the small ways she closed the distance between us. When I shifted against the railing, she mirrored me, leaning closer without a thought. When silence fell, she didn't rush to fill it. Instead, she let it linger, her gaze holding mine with quiet steadiness, as though she was comfortable resting in the space others might have called tension. At one point, a group inside erupted in laughter. She smiled faintly, then turned to me, her eyes catching mine in a moment that stretched far too long. It felt like we were both silently acknowledging something we shouldn't say. Then it happened. She leaned closer, just enough that her shoulder grazed against my chest as she bent slightly to whisper. "They really don't stop, do they?" she said, referring to the noise from inside. But her words hardly mattered. What I felt was the warmth of her body brushing mine, the faint brush of her perfume threading through the cool air, and the quiet thrum in my chest that quickened instantly. I swallowed, unsure if I should step back or stay still. She didn't move away immediately. Her shoulder lingered against me for 1, 2, 3 breaths before she finally straightened again. And when she did, her eyes flicked up to meet mine, as though checking whether I'd noticed what had just passed between us. I had. Every nerve in me had. But neither of us said anything. We let the moment settle, fragile and unspoken, a thread woven tighter by silence. Inside, life went on as if nothing had changed. Out here, though, something had shifted, a weightless but undeniable pull that neither of us could undo. And I knew then, even without words, that this wasn't just passing attraction. This was the beginning of something neither of us had planned for, and neither of us could ignore. After a while, the chatter from inside drifted into the background, muffled by distance. The night had grown quieter, the garden wrapped in a kind of hushed stillness that made every sound feel sharper. The creak of the porch boards beneath our feet, the hum of distant crickets, even the steady rhythm of my own breathing. She set her mug down, then folded her arms lightly across her chest, her eyes drifting toward the stars above us. I followed her gaze, though I barely saw anything. All my focus was pulled toward her, the way the light caught the curve of her cheek, the faint furrow in her brow, as though she was thinking about something she couldn't quite say aloud. For a while, we didn't speak. And yet, the silence wasn't empty. It felt weighted, alive, as though we were both waiting for something to break it. When she finally turned back to me, her expression had softened. "You're different from what I expected," she said quietly. I gave a small, almost nervous laugh. "Different how?" She tilted her head, studying me for a moment that felt far too long. Then she shook her head lightly, as though deciding not to answer. Just different. Her words lingered, unanswered, like a door she had only half opened. And then it happened, not with words, but with something far more delicate. Her hand shifted slightly at her side, hesitating for a moment. Then, almost as though she had made a decision she couldn't take back, she reached for me. I felt her fingers brush against mine first, tentative, searching. My heart jolted. Slowly, deliberately, she slid her hand into mine, her palm warm and steady. Time seemed to halt. The cool night air wrapped around us, but her hand was like fire, grounding me in the present moment. Her fingers intertwined with mine naturally, as though they had always belonged there. For a second, I didn't even breathe, afraid that any movement might break what was happening. I glanced at her, but she wasn't looking at me. Her eyes were fixed forward, toward the garden, as if pretending it was nothing, as if holding my hand was casual, unremarkable. But the slight tremor in her fingers betrayed her. And when I squeezed gently in return, she exhaled, the smallest sound escaping her lips. Not quite a sigh, not quite relief, but something caught in between. I didn't speak. Neither did she. Words would have felt clumsy, unnecessary. The gesture itself was enough, a quiet confession that told me more than any sentence could. Her thumb brushed lightly over my knuckles, a subtle movement, but it sent a current rushing through me, steady and undeniable. It was a simple act, and yet it shifted everything. Standing there, hand in hand beneath the quiet sky, I realized this wasn't just curiosity anymore. This was something deeper, something neither of us could pretend away. And though no one else would notice, though no one else would know, I knew we had just crossed an invisible line, one that neither of us would ever step back from. Her hand remained in mine, the warmth of her skin against my own anchoring me to a moment that felt unreal. The garden stretched around us in silence, the soft glow of the porch light painting her features in half shadow, half golden warmth. I couldn't stop looking at her. Every small detail seemed magnified. The curve of her lashes as she glanced down, the faint press of her lips as if she was holding back something unsayable, the way her breath rose and fell in rhythm with mine. My mind was a storm of questions. Why me? What did this mean? What would happen if someone saw us like this? But her hand didn't falter. If anything, her grip grew firmer, more deliberate, as though she wanted me to know she had chosen this. Finally, she turned her head, her eyes meeting mine. There was no teasing in them now, no playful distance. Just a raw honesty that sent a chill through me. She held my gaze for a long, unbroken moment, and then, almost like she was surrendering something she had fought against for too long, she smiled faintly. You're too dangerous to ignore. Her voice was quiet, but every syllable cut straight through me. The words carried more than attraction. They carried warning, vulnerability, desire, and something close to resignation. Dangerous, not because of recklessness, not because of reckoning, but because of how easily I had slipped past her walls. I didn't know what to say. My chest tightened, the weight of her confession pressing into me like a secret I wasn't sure I was allowed to hold. But my silence didn't seem to unsettle her. If anything, it gave her the courage to continue. Her thumb traced slow circles against my hand, her touch trembling slightly despite her composed face. I told myself I wouldn't, that I couldn't. But you. She stopped, shaking her head softly, as though words would betray her more than silence ever could. I wanted to answer, to tell her that I felt it too, that the connection had been building from the moment we met. But my throat tightened, my heart pounding too loudly for me to trust my own voice. So instead, I stepped closer. The gap between us narrowed until I could feel the heat of her body, her presence surrounding me in a way that made the rest of the world fade. Her breath mingled with mine, warm in the cool night. She didn't pull away. Her eyes flicked to my lips for the briefest second, then back to my eyes, her restraint written in every line of her face. We didn't kiss. We didn't need to. Her hand in mine, her whispered words still echoing in the night air, were enough to shift everything. Enough to make me realize this wasn't a fleeting spark. It was the kind of fire that, once lit, couldn't be ignored. Her words, "You're too dangerous to ignore," echoed in me long after she had fallen silent. I held her hand tighter without meaning to, as though letting go would undo everything that had just passed between us. And yet, beneath the warmth of her touch, a tide of conflict surged. My thoughts spun with questions I didn't want to face. She was older, wiser, someone my neighbor trusted as family. What would people say if they saw us like this? What would it mean for her, for me, if we gave into something that was already stretching the edges of what felt acceptable? I must have let some of those doubts show on my face, because she tilted her head, studying me with quiet patience. She didn't rush me, didn't pull her hand away. Instead, she simply asked, "What's on your mind?" The gentleness of her voice nearly broke me. "I don't know if this is fair," I admitted, the words catching in my throat. "To you, or to myself. You've lived more, seen more. I feel like I'm stepping into something I don't fully understand." She didn't flinch. Instead, she exhaled slowly, her eyes softening as if my hesitation confirmed something she already knew. "You think I don't feel the same conflict?" she said quietly. "Every part of me knows I shouldn't be standing here, holding your hand. But I am, and I can't bring myself to regret it." The honesty in her voice disarmed me. For a moment, I saw past the calm, graceful woman she showed the world and glimpsed the vulnerability beneath. The woman who feared, who hesitated, who was just as unsure as I was. I wanted to reassure her, but I also wanted to confess how much I was drawn to her. Not just to her beauty, but to the way she listened, the way she carried her experiences like both weight and wisdom, the way she made me feel seen in a way I hadn't before. "I'm afraid," I whispered. Her free hand rose slowly, hesitantly, before coming to rest against my chest. The warmth of her palms spread through me, grounding me, even as her touch sent a current racing beneath my skin. "So am I," she admitted. Her forehead lowered, almost brushing mine, and in that closeness, I could feel her heartbeat quickening in sync with my own. We stood there, caught between fear and longing, between reason and desire. Neither of us moved to cross the final line, but neither of us pulled away either. The weight of unspoken choices wrapped around us, heavy yet strangely comforting. The world beyond the porch felt irrelevant. The laughter inside, the judgments that might come tomorrow, even the years that separated us. What mattered was this. She hadn't let go, and neither had I. And in the silence that followed, I realized something. Sometimes the most dangerous thing wasn't crossing a line. It was denying the truth that the line had already been crossed. The night felt endless yet intimate, as if the world itself had paused to give us this fragile space. We stood there on the porch, hands intertwined, our bodies close but not yet crossing the line into anything more than a quiet, shared warmth. I could feel the steady beat of her heart beneath her palm, its rhythm mingling with my own, a subtle but undeniable connection that had grown stronger with each passing hour. She didn't speak at first. Instead, she rested her head lightly against my shoulder, a tentative gesture that carried both trust and vulnerability. I felt the softness of her hair brushing against my cheek, the faint warmth of her breath, and I realized I could stay in that position forever and it would still feel like the most natural thing in the world. Inside, the distant laughter of the gathering reminded me that life was still moving, that reality would return eventually. But here, out on the quiet porch, nothing else mattered. Her hand squeezed mine gently, a small but deliberate reminder that she wasn't letting go, not of me, not of this moment. I wrapped my arm around her shoulders instinctively, feeling the gentle press of her body against mine. It was an embrace full of understanding and care, not urgency or possessiveness. Just warmth, grounding, and the unspoken acknowledgement that we were choosing each other, even if only for now. She lifted her head slightly, her eyes meeting mine with a softness that made my chest tighten. "I'm glad we stayed out here," she whispered. "Me too," I said, my voice low, almost a mirror to hers. There was a pause, one of those silences that speak louder than words. I brushed a stray lock of hair from her face, my fingers lingering against her cheek for a heartbeat longer than necessary. She leaned into the touch, and I felt the subtle give of her body against mine, a quiet surrender, not forced, but freely offered. I kissed the top of her head softly, a gesture that conveyed more than words could. Respect, care, and a promise all at once. She exhaled against my shoulder, a sound that carried relief, comfort, and something like contentment. We didn't need to speak about the future. Tonight was enough. Tonight, the gap between our worlds, our ages, our experiences, our fears, felt smaller, bridged by honesty, trust, and the shared warmth of our closeness. Eventually, we pulled back just slightly, enough to look at each other fully. There was a quiet understanding in her eyes, a gentle acknowledgement that whatever tomorrow might bring, this connection, the way we had truly seen each other for the first time, was real and undeniable. The night held us, quiet and protective, as we finally stepped back toward the house, still hand in hand. There was no rush, no expectation, just the knowledge that we had found something rare and worth cherishing. And as the porch light faded behind us, I realized something profound. Slow burn, unspoken desire, and careful, deliberate connection could carry a warmth far deeper than any rushed passion. We hadn't crossed into the realm of romance fully, but we had found intimacy, trust, and belonging. And that, I knew, was only the beginning. As our story ends tonight, I want to know, have you ever felt a connection so quiet yet so undeniable that it changed everything? Share your thoughts in the comments below. I read every one. And if you enjoyed this slow burn romance, don't forget to like, subscribe, and hit the bell so you never miss a story that makes your heart pause. 47.